Okay, in this lesson we are going to again use planar tracking to clean up some wrinkles on Blue's jacket here. Now, it's interesting, if you take a look at the footage here, we got a couple of interesting aspects here. We have a fluttering of the shirt from the wind, or the jacket I should say, right here on the shoulder and the arm, whereas right here and on the collar you'll see that it's relatively quiet. So I'll just kind of play a couple frames. Now, in order to deal with like this fluttering and bending of the cloth and so forth, it's probably best to use vectors for the paint up work on here. For this area here, we could probably get away with planar tracking and using blur nodes and so forth, blurs and sharpens. Commonly, this is used to clean up wrinkles and so forth for cosmetic purposes. I got a whole cosmetic video on the way. But for now, I'm going to just go ahead and just try to clean this up as best I can. Now, the only problem with this shot is the fact that, well, first off, before we even get involved in that, I think it's about time we created a milestone. And you'll commonly see this as, it takes a while for me to cache a specific frame here. So first off, I'm going to crop the information here and just crop it. So you can see, crop it to the format here, and you could say reformat. So you can see now we're at 8, and we're not actually rendering that outside information there, which is really good. And let's go ahead and create a milestone. So I'm going to make a backdrop, and for some reason the backdrop is always created up there for sake of where the origin is or whatever in this program. So usually you want to select a node when you do it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this backdrop, grow it up. And I like making any sort of milestone backdrops specifically, pretty much, I'm going to pull this down into a red node. Kind of tells me something's up. So I'll make a dot node here, and I'm going to make a right node. And I'll take a right node, plug that right there. And I will add a switch node, from which I will switch out a eventual read node that'll be over here from this right node. Now, I'm well aware, for those of you wondering, you can make a write node into a read node by hitting write file, but I find that sometimes it can give you some errors and so forth. So what I'm going to do is take this file input here for the write node. We're going to write out a DPX sequence. So I'm going to go ahead and click here, and I have a folder in here which is So I'll put this into milestone 1. So I create a milestone. I'll just call this milestone 1 dot, and then 4 hashtags dot DPX. So you can see it defaults to the Cineon DPX. If you want to really be picky, you can do 12-bit. When we did the Sam Jackson commercials for Capital One, we did try to stay, I believe we stayed at 12-bit, or to be safe, we'd actually export out milestones at EXRs, because sometimes there's data in here. If you have data at this specific point that you want to keep in the form of multi-passes and so forth, you definitely want to export out a EXR, but in this case a DPX is good enough. And then of course I want to use my wonderful milestone tool set here, my wonderful little root folder, blah 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 extension here. I just like this. It's for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that there, and that should pretty much put the DPX where it is. So it's going to go into the milestone, wherever the actual Nuke file is, and then the subfolder milestone, and then the milestone 1.dpx. So I'm going to go ahead and render this out and render the whole sequence, and we will be back. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to really just copy and paste this file node that I have. I'm going to make an R for read node, and I'll plug in my milestone, and you'll see that the extension is where my computer is at, so I'm just going to paste that extension there. So U will be based on reference to where you're at, and hopefully it'll work. I'm not sure why it's not working now. Let's see here. That's odd. Go ahead and plug that back in again. And for some reason, Not sure why. This should work. It's giving me a read error here. Let's see. Oh, I see. I copied and pasted it twice. Whoops. All right, so, and actually just copy the whole thing in there. There we go. There we go. So you can see, again, I'm just taking it. This is a great little scripting. I know you guys are like sick of me talking about it, but some people, like in most tutorials, they tell you like, go to your Asper settings, set your project default script directory. Yeah, that's great and everything if you're working on a project, but you know, do that for every single Nuke file just for the sake of training, I'd find to be a little bit ridiculous. So again, you could take this switch, put this over to the right node, set this to read file, but what I find is that it's still taking forever to play through. You can see it's like dragging, and so I don't know what that's all about. So I'm going to plug this into the switch nodes, put the switch node to 1. So now we're bypassing this here, and now if I put my viewer to the switch, you'll see our feedback should be a lot faster. See that? So that's just me, you know, whatever. So again, I'm going to label this. Let's go ahead and extend this out a little bit. And pull that right there, and we'll just call this milestone 1. Different studios use different terminologies. Usually you could call this like, you could call this clean plate, milestone 1. And then of course bring up the font color here, font size I should say. There we go. All right, so we have our milestone, and we're still going to do some clean plating, but I figured I just, for the sake of speed, we can kind of get this ball rolling here. And again, you do want to do this type of stuff. When we did the Sam Jackson commercials, all green screen work, all mattes with the RGBA, because we had to deal with the edge itself, were rendered out as DPX sequences that were then ported into another comp that were actually brought in for the sake of building out the composites and so forth. So there's a lot of referencing and jumping from one comp to the next, and the read nodes, you know, the write nodes and all that stuff. So again, it is what it is. I'm going to turn off this file read here. Okay, so let's talk about this shot, and let me go ahead and play it now that I can play it back really quick. You can see that we start out very close to our actor here, and we move further away. And I talked about whenever you're doing clean plating or you know, cleaning up a set here based on the actual texture resolution, you definitely want to be as close to the character as possible. Now we get pretty far away, so if I did a paint job here and then allowed the propagation of the planar track to come back to here, we'd have a lower resolution. So it is a compromise to a certain degree. So I'm going to choose a middle ground. I'm not going to be able to get all these wrinkles, and I'm going to talk about vector-based you know, cleanup, which is going to be for this shoulder area in the next lesson. But for now, I want to just use the old classic planar tracking. And again, this technique is used a lot for cosmetic purposes. You can do it for wrinkles. It's a lot of softening and sharpening. I had a friend who I work with. He did all the cleanup work for Han Solo and Princess Leia in Star Wars Episode 7, because as he described it, Harrison Ford had a turkey neck, and you know, he even had to basically get the hourglass shape kind of fixed up around the character as well. So I mean, you're actually changing the figure of the, you know, the silhouette of the character as well. So there's a lot of work that goes into beautician work / cosmetic work. All right, so for this, I'm looking at this patch, and I don't like these wrinkles, like I said. The key to fixing wrinkles is to maintain sharpness on the very heavy details. Obviously, this is just a fold in the actual, you know, there's a difference between folds and wrinkles. So this is like a wrinkle, that's a wrinkle, that's a wrinkle. This is just a fold in the actual cloth itself. So you got to like pick your battles as far as what you want to clean up. You soften too much, it's going to look like a big blurry mess, but you want to maintain some of these large, what I call macro or large big detail type folds. So what I'm going to do here is, again, same thing we did before. I'm going to choose a frame. I have to choose a frame here first before I even start. So I'm going to choose probably, let's go with, I don't want to choose frame 132 because we're too far away. And I would say probably let's go with frame let's go with frame 82. That's probably good. So I'm going to do a frame hold for frame 82. So I'll just do frame 82. And I'm going to already start with the cleanup before I even do the planar tracking, which I should do first just to make sure that it actually tracks correct, but I'm pretty sure we'll be okay. So here's the frame hold, and we are going to do a roto paint. And we'll go ahead and throw this out. Now, as we blur this, we're going to be losing the granularity of the image. So the question is, okay, what do I do in general? Do I just do another one of those wonderful denoisers? Yes. So I know you're like sick of these denoisers, but I'm going to go ahead and throw the denoiser on. I'm going to make an extension off here for the noise. And again, it's going to ask for a sampled area, so I'll double click and put my viewer to the noise node here, and I need to sample an area that is relatively noisy, probably like that area right there. So now if we take a look at our noise levels, let's go ahead and take a look. Again, you want to use neat video for this type of stuff. So let me just see, is this working? Let's see. There's grabs, there's an area right here. I think it's working. Let's see. I'll put my viewer back and forth. Yeah, there's something going on. Not much going on, but there is could increase the denoise amount here. Yeah, that should be good. All right, so let's do a little bit of cleanup. And again, you're going to just go to your blur and sharpen tools. So you can see you do have this blur tool. And what I usually do is I'll put a hardness to like probably like 0.1, and my opacity I'll bring it to 0.5 or 0.3 on here. And again, I don't want to blur the harsh necessary details like this here, right? I want to actually just shoot for these. So I'm going to set this to all frames so I can get ahead of myself here. And I'm going to get rid of these details like right here. And I'm going to be very careful not to hit up these large macro-based details, the very large folds that obviously are real. The folds actually give us, they're there to put my opacity down to like 1 here. So I'm going to try to just be very gentle with this and stay away from the big folds. I'm going to have to reintroduce grain just like we did before. But I'm going to try to get rid of these micro detail based little details here. And this is the subtle work that goes into removing wrinkles from human beings. You don't go overboard on this stuff because there's really, yeah, I mean, with a still image, you can go crazy with Photoshop, and there's a lot of, you could go online and just see some of the wonderful work that people have done in regards to cleanup. But again, you do have a limited, I have to watch out for the edges, though. I can't really get too crazy here, and I'm staying away from the buttons as well. And let's see here. So I'm going to stay away from this big fold here. And yeah, let's see if I can kind of get that in there. And I'm trying to just get these guys out. Maybe this guy right here too. What looks, what kind of like looks unprofessional? Again, the wardrobe person should have been fired on this day, but I didn't have no wardrobe person, so what can you say? And then after you soften, you do have the option of coming in here. If you feel that you need to, you can add some sharpening in here. So the sharpening, again, I put the value to something like 0.03. Hardness, you can leave it at that. And again, make sure you got this set to all frames so you don't have to do this again. And you can come over here and sharpen up the edges that you may have painted like that. Just a little bit of sharpening if you feel that you got pretty close to these edges. So let's take a look at the difference between these two. So here is the denoise and the roto. So you can see the cleanup work that we've done. And it's real subtle, but this is welcome to the industry. This is just what it is. So I'll just come over here and maybe do a little bit of more blurring here in this area here. And it could be like 50% blur and so forth. And I'm kind of 50-50 on this guy. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, so a little bit, maybe just a little bit of cleanup right there. So by doing a blur at 0.5%, you can still see the fold, but you're getting out some of those nasty, heavy blur details here. Again, wouldn't it be more smarter just to give this guy a nice, iron jacket on the day of the set? Yes, duh. So I don't know what else to say with that. All right, so now that we've done this paint work, we are good to go. So let's go ahead and start our roto for our planar track. So I will go ahead and move this dot node down here. Let's kind of organize this a little bit. I know everybody's always trying to read these comps yet. For those of you that are in the land of December 2018, I have not posted up all of the iterations of the different files. I will eventually, so I have to re-download it if you've already downloaded the source files, because I'm just kind of doing this in my spare time, so to speak. All right, so let's put this to, and again, we're on frame 82, like I said before, and I'm actually going to create 2 roto areas here, believe it or not. So I'm going to grab this area here. And let's see, where did I paint? Let's make sure yeah, it's about right. Okay, so I'll go back to this roto. So I painted about there. And then I'm going to make another separate roto for this area right here. You can actually do this, believe it or not. So I have 2 rotos, which I can grab both of them and do a planar track, so they go into one specific folder, here. So now with that said, I can go ahead and start tracking this data. Now, what I like to do, if you're doing some tracking, is add a sharpen node just before the roto. It's going to sharpen up the edges, so it's going to be able to grab a hold of these details. And we'll just take this roto node and go back and load up our planar tracker, and we'll track forward. So I'll just pause and wait till we get it done. Okay, so we will scrub back to frame 82 and track to the beginning of the shot. Now keep in mind, and I should bear in mind that if you take a look, we will be, you'll see that this is starting to go off frame. That's perfectly fine. If it goes too off frame, it might get crazy and goofy. We have a relatively quiet shot here. In other words, the translation scale rotation is very subtle. Blue is not doing a ballerina dance for us, so we should be able to hold on and not have any weird interpolation issues. It is guessing the interpolation data down here as it's kind of moving up and down in the frame. So again, it still does a great job. We're not going to get every wrinkle just because of the dynamics of this shot and the way at which the movement is, but again, we're probably going to do our best. So again, I'll just hit pause and wait till we come back. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit play and see how it's holding up. So again, don't judge it till you actually cache it. Very important. And there's a little bit of, wobbliness going on down here. You can see it a little bit. See how it's kind of freaking out in the areas that are just real subtle, but these are type of things you got to be aware of. Okay, so what do we do here? Do I have to recreate these rotos? I mean, you can if you want, but what you can do is just take this and use this as a mask with a key mix. So I'm going to create a key mix, and for those of you that haven't taken my tutorials on roto, basically what it is B is the background plate. So this is the background plate footage, right? Just move this. I'm going to have to move all this stuff over a little bit here. So imagine this is just your original footage, right? Sort of like a merge node. And the A input is the new information, which is our paintwork. And then the mask is basically what we have here, which is the planar track. So if I put my viewer to the planar track, it's outputting, it's outputting alpha. So if I hit that letter A for alpha, this is the alpha it's going to expose. So anywhere that there's white, it's going to expose A. So, okay, and then B is going to be what's behind. So now if I put my viewer to it, you can see that we are good to go, except we did not add a planar track yet. We're kind of jumping ahead here. So let me take my planar map here, And let's export out a corner pin relative. And it creates. And that's going to be plugged in right after the RotoPaint node, and there you go. So it's a pretty harsh fall off, as you can see. There's also a difference in lighting as the camera moves around the character. So what we can do on this roto here is I can actually add a blur node or between here and here. And what this will do is we'll actually blur out this. And again, I can do a lot of things with this. I can create an erode node too, which is a dilate erode, and I can shrink this down to shrink the matte and use the blur to blur the matte. So let's go ahead and just see how that looks. So if you're having a hard time finding out, trying to see what exactly I did here, is I'll add a grade node here, and I'll just shift the offset of the color information to red a little bit so you can see what exactly is being manipulated here. So what I can do is come in here, and again I could take my dilate tool here and dilate this down so my mask isn't that big. I'm a little worried about this area here crossing over, but not having a heart attack just yet. And then I can blur this by blurring the transition between. So again, I'm having an issue down here, so I'm going to jump over to my let's go to my planar and take a look here. And I think for this curve here, I'm going to turn on my ripple edit tool and just move that in a little bit. That's going to make a keyframe offset for all keyframes and turn that off. So now if you take a look, what's going on here is this is exposing the area. It's doing its best as a grid warp. I didn't get to, mess with the wrinkles down here because I did a little bit of a compromise. But you can see what we got. So now what I can do is take this and disable the grade node. So, I could just, for the sake of just seeing. And again, you can see the difference. I'll put my viewer here to the original. Put my viewer here, and you can see we got a nice cleanup job. But don't count your chickens before they hatch. You want to go through your entire footage and look for any weird artifacts at the bottom here. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and full frame this. And I'm going to try to stay in the bottom right quadrant here. Just hit play and let it play through and see if I get any weird warping issues or if I get some strange artifacts of, so I got to be, just going to kind of come down here and just see if I'm looking, see, you might find some strange stuff going on down here. Don't forget, as we're doing this, there's a couple things that we don't have. We don't have motion blur. We don't have the reintroduction of the grain. So these are things you have to be an adult about and actually get in there and fix. So again, we have to come in. We have to initialize a slight bit of motion blur. We have to initialize a little bit of regrain. But as of right now, I'm just judging this to see that I'm not getting any weird artifacts or something like that. And I'm sure you're going to be excited the next lesson as I get into vectors. Smart vectors, really cool stuff for jackets that have wrinkles, or in this case, this kind of jacket that's fluttering in the wind, putting tattoos on people's faces. Vectors are really cool. They're a little bit of a cheat way to do some cosmetic cleanup work. So as I kind of watch this, I'm looking at the bottom. I want to look at the bottom frame here to see if I'm getting any strange, weird artifacts and so forth, but I'm just going to let it play through, and then I'm going to be able to add the grain. But again, don't add grain, don't add motion blur, because that's computationally expensive. You just want to take some time to see if everything looks good. So obviously you can see we cleaned up this area here, and up here, but we didn't really get to touch the bottom of his jacket. So that's a compromise that we have to do because of the movement of the camera. I could have put this to frame 132 and cleaned it up, but I found that I was getting some strange artifacts at the bottom. But again, it's a little subtle reality that you're going to see, and that's what compositing is. It's all these little subtleties. How can I improve the shot? And even if it's in a subtle way, even if it's a little bit of a compromise, I've got a nice cleanup work here that works well. Okay. So at this point, I don't really need this grade note. I think I'll just leave the grade note in there and I'll rename it like mask check grade. Might as well just throw it in there. And at this point, I come to the corner pin, and we can initialize motion blur. I'm just going to leave the defaults on here. I probably don't need much, just a little bit. And then after motion blur, that's when we add the grain. So again, I'm going to add the good old grain on here, and the grain actually goes on this footage right here. So if you do recall, in this case we do not have to use the unpremult, premult stuff because the mask is being masked out here. So I will come over here and just do you have to hit the letter F, furnace core underscore, and you can see F underscore regrain. It's going to ask for the grain footage again. That's where we drag to the original footage to do the sample. And it's going to ask for the same thing we did before. So I'm going to come over here, just sample this footage, analyze, and let it analyze the footage. And again, we don't want to have fireflies, which is the granularity that looks too noisy. So we'll dial down the grain amount and also the grain size if it's too big. I'd say the grain size is a little bit too big, and the grain amount is just way too much. Compare it to the original by putting your key mix here and your viewer here, and you could see the intensity of the grain. So it's kind of hard to say. I'd say that's probably good. I'm just going to take the regrain and I'll bring this down to like 0.4. I'll bring that grain size back up because I think it's probably good. So if I go ahead and put my viewer to the key mix here, use my arrow keys back and forth, I can kind of look at the grain. You can see it's starting to bog down a little bit here. And again, you can see this regrain is happening on everything here, but the mask is actually only masking out, this mask here is only masking out to this area here, so we're good. So again, just double check, go back between the two. You shouldn't see any change on this side, and then you should see grain being added here. So I think we're good on that. Okay, so I have this milestone here, this guy right here. So what I can do is I can take this, plug this into the crop. Please don't crash. And I can move this down the pipe. As we keep moving, we keep moving down the pipe here. And then I'll rewrite this out. Okay, so I'll take all these goodies and at this point we could start making backdrops so that our other compositors can open up these comps and know where the roadmap is. So I'll call this Planar jacket fix. And what else can we do here? This right here is the background fix. So I'll just make a backdrop. Actually, let me take the class content, pull this over here. Backdrop, and we will call this the background cleanup. And so you can kind of see how everything is in here. So I'll let you, I'll kind of organize this a little bit. And let me just go through the nodes in case you want to see them again. So again, you could freeze the video if you're curious. And that's it. So what I'm going to do down here now is take this clean plate here, and I will rewrite this. This switch node, I'm still going to leave it 1, but this right node, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite out. So again, I will hit render and hit OK. And for some reason, it's not. Let me just make sure the inputs are right here. I should only be rendering frames 1 to 132. And I'll hit OK. And there we go. So we're going to sit back and relax, and eventually in the next lesson, we're going to start from this milestone again, and we're going to keep doing this sort of effect. I'm going to do one last cleanup on the shoulder using smart vectors. So I will see you then. Okay, so just looking at my footage here, I'm getting this weird artifact here, and I think what I forgot to do was under my roto planar track, I have to put this to output alpha. Yeah, I'm outputting an alpha image here, but the problem is when I get to, yeah, it's like there's a issue here with this alpha here. So I'll have to put this to output alpha premult RGB replace, and there's my alpha input. And now if I do this, I think I shouldn't have any issues here. I was having some weird, it's really just the alpha information I'm pulling through here. Yeah, there we go. So again, just put this to output alpha premult RGB replace. You just need to, this needs to be cut out. Otherwise it's going to distort everything. So sorry about that, gang. And again, I'll just go ahead and just rewrite this out. Again, I'll put my viewer here. You can see everything looks good. And again, you know, I'm probably going to basically create another crop node here. So I'll just copy and paste this crop node. Throw that in real quick. There we go. And just keep cropping along and render that out. Okay, so next lesson we'll be doing the vector paint stuff.